So hold your calls and your emails this morning. It is a Monday morning. That would be the 9th of August, 2022. We have a great week for you. Tomorrow, the one and only Santos Bonacci, and he is I think a cosmology truther is the best way to put him. Jack and Margie Flynn, they talk some about their latest book, which is all about banking and how you can navigate the banking world and hopefully not get in trouble and possibly protect yourself, and some very interesting things. It's a book all about banking. And then we have another lady coming up this week on regenerative farming, and she's very interesting. So we have a lot of things to do this week. Come by and see us. This morning, again, we are pre-recorded, so hold your calls and emails. We're going to talk to Dr. Robert Cywes. He's an MD. He's a PhD. I saw a video with Dr. Cywes when I first started looking into this whole carnivore thing a few months ago, and I really liked his what he was working with obesity, and I think you're going to really enjoy our conversation. I know you will. His website is obesityunderstood.com. Dr. Cywes, good morning. How are you, sir? Nice to have you here.
Good morning, Patrick. Good to be here with you.
Yeah. And that accent is South African.
That's right. Yeah, I've been in the U.S. since 1989, but I've retained my accent quite pleasingly for me.
Yeah.
That's my background.
I think the only South African I've ever interviewed is 30, 40 years ago, Gary Player. And,
excellent. Fantastic casting of our country.
Is he still around? Is he still?
Very much so. He's still active. He's older, but he's active. He's a philanthropist and just an all-around good representative of our country and of the sport. And
he was always into vitamins and health and stuff. And he used to do about, I think, 500 push-ups or something crazy.
He's actually very, very involved in regenerative health and longevity and what we call senescence. So that's a piece of what we do, but it's he does it from the additive side. We do it from the removal side. In other words, if you remove all the things that result in early death, then you're going to live longer by default.
That's a good thing. It's just kind of get rid of bad thoughts, and then you'll just live longer, right?
It's a slightly different approach. Most people try to take vitamin supplements and do things to live longer. Our genetics typically makes us live a very good long period of time. Right. But if you choose to text and drive at the same time, you're making a choice that may potentially shorten your life very quickly. So you remove texting and driving, you're probably going to live a little longer. You don't quit smoking. Alcohol's fine, but if you quit overdoing it, those are the things. And what we're going to talk about is you get rid of carbohydrate, sugar, and starch in your life. All of those things are subtractions from how long you're supposed to live. So if you remove the subtractions, you're going to live pretty long.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. So, you specialize in obesity. You actually do obesity surgery and things like that, right?
Well, to a certain extent. That's my background, but I've evolved more to look at this from a metabolic health perspective. So it's much broader than obesity. We're looking at diabetes, we're looking at cancer, we're looking at Alzheimer's, and there's a root cause for all of those things. We tend to think of them as different endpoints, but if you work them backwards, they really have a single root cause. And that is the shift over the last 50 to 70 years in our diet, where humans believe that they're better than God and nature in terms of nutritional provision. They've said to God and nature, no, you guys are wrong. We know better. This is the way you should eat. Don't eat real food. Eat the crap that we tell you to eat.
So, Dr. Cywes, is it actually possible that over the last 100 or whatever years when we started eating this rice and pasta and cookies and cakes and crackers and sugar, that we are just wrong? It's just not species specific for us?
Absolutely. The belief that certain things are bad for us and certain things are good for us is absolutely 100% unsupported by science. And one of the greatest frauds in our modern healthcare propagated at multiple levels. And there's huge parallels, for example, with the opioid crisis in terms of the escalation of where the problems lie. But one of the greatest frauds in our healthcare system right now, and I'm very comfortable talking about this, is the fact that cholesterol is bad for us and everybody should be on a statin. If you don't have to be a doctor to understand this. Logically, if you follow the algorithm that most doctors would have you have, how much cholesterol is there in an egg? There's a huge amount. Yeah, there's a huge amount of cholesterol in an egg. That's why for a long time eggs were demonized. Yeah. So, but if you think about it this way, if cholesterol was bad for us, and we're not that far removed from other animals, if cholesterol was bad for an egg, the egg is going to become a chicken. That means all chickens should be profoundly unhealthy, and baby chickens should be dying of heart attacks left, right, and center. If sugar was so important for us, how much sugar do you think there is in an egg? There's zero. It's less than 1 gram. So if sugar was important for life, surely chickens wouldn't be possible. But oh no, our healthcare providers have said, God, you're wrong. Cholesterol is bad for you. You've got to lower your cholesterol. Cholesterol is in our bodies for a very powerful, positive purpose. And cholesterol is a healing and a reparative molecule. It responds to injury. It doesn't cause injury. So if you're damaging your blood vessels with elevated sugar and with nicotine, the cholesterol comes as a patch to try to heal that. But when we look at those blood vessels, all we see are these Band-Aids, and we say, aha, the Band-Aid is killing us.
So that's what happened in the Framingham study. They found cholesterol in the arteries, and they blamed that because they were at the scene of the crime, but they were not the perpetrator.
Correct. The firemen who are putting out the fire are not the arsonists. And yet we've believed in that, and then pharma took that over. They've got I think last year it was $3.2 trillion was spent on statin medications worldwide.
Wait. Oh, $3 trillion worldwide, Dr. Cywes?
$3.2 trillion was spent on one medication class called statins.
Is that number correct? It's that much? Wow.
That much. So if you look at that amount of money, wow, the amount of lobbying, the amount of invasive advertising is enormous.
Wow. And,
we as individuals need to ask our providers, why is this important? So it's just a simple thing. I mean, you asked me, is there truth in the fact that the modern advice is correct? No, the data and the science does not support it, but pharma does because profit does. So really, healthcare has become a business, not a science. And MBAs are less likely to treat you than your physicians. But we've been conned.
A brother of mine who I talk about this, who I love dearly, and I talk to him about the statins that he's on, and he goes to his cardiologist, a true story, and his cardiologist says, I'm sorry, I won't treat you if you get off the statins.
And you know what? That cardiologist's right. It is also the right to your brother to say, thank you very much, I am not going to have you as my treating physician. Right. And the majority of my patients, and this is so sad about healthcare, it is so sad that the majority of my patients have had disputes or have fired their own healthcare providers because of the inadequacy and the lack of support and that kind of paternalistic attitude. Patrick, what I tell my patients is this: look, I can give you all the science behind the falsehood and the fraud of statins. And I can tell you that it's probably not in your best interest to use a statin. But if you want to use it, if you believe you should, I don't care. I care about you, but I'm not going to tell you I'm going to fire you if you take a statin. Right. See, here's the thing, Patrick. The one thing all human beings have in common, all of us, we're all going to die. How we get there is our choice. Along the way, we gather knowledge so that we can make better choices. And based on that knowledge, we then decide for ourselves what pathway, what trajectory our lives take. Yeah. So, I'll tell you an opposing argument to that cardiologist about the statins. You can then weigh up their advice versus our advice, and then you can decide for yourself which advice to follow.
Yes, sir.
I'm not here to tell you must do something, you have to do something. I'm here to provide information from our background, and you can then decide for yourself what advice you want to follow.
We all have free will, and we all want to do what we want, right? That's the deal.
And I think that is what the internet has helped us with tremendously, is that we are able to corroborate and identify knowledge. Now, if you go down the rabbit hole of a false theory, so be it. But if you are smart about this, you can corroborate information and then perhaps talk to a couple of experts, a physician or whatever it may be, and get their truth and then make your decision for yourself. Because I'll tell you what, that cardiologist is not going to go over to your brother's place and open his mouth and put the statin in his mouth.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's a decision we have to make as individuals.
So just a short story for all the people that may be listening that know people on statins or are on them, millions of Americans just in this country, what are they doing? What does the science say that they do to the body that is just not good, undesirable?
Right. Well, there is a very powerful pathway in the body to absorb cholesterol and to produce cholesterol in the liver. That isn't there by mistake. That is not a system that's been put into our physiology as a death wish. The biology doesn't work that way. So that's not kind of that death wish. We're not lemmings. So it is there for a positive purpose. And what statins do is they block one of the enzymes that converts lipids, fat to, and sometimes sugar, to cholesterol. Cholesterol is inherent in every cellular membrane. In other words, every lipid membrane in every cell has to have cholesterol in it. In fact, 1/5 of all the cholesterol in the body, 20%, is in the human brain. And without cholesterol, the human brain suffers very dire consequences. Cholesterol is also, fat and cholesterol is also the final healing process of injury to blood vessels. So if you injure your blood vessels, and we're doing that all the time,
yes,
you form a little clot, and then the clot attracts cells. And then as the clot heals, it gets replaced by a little layer of fat. Now, if you're repetitively injuring your blood vessels, you're going to find more deposits of fat. And people that die of heart attacks and strokes are typically people that come from one of two backgrounds. They either have a background history of smoking, or they have a background history of chronic excessive sugar and starch consumption, both of which are very powerful injurious agents to the blood vessels. So in the 1950s and 60s, when people were dying of heart attacks and strokes, and they did autopsies and they found their blood vessels were clogged with fat, they said, aha, it must be the fat in our diet that's killing us. What they didn't understand is there was about 50 or 60% of people that were dying not of strokes and heart attacks, and they did autopsies on those people. Their blood vessels were pristine. They were all eating the same amount of fat, but one group was a smoking group and one group didn't smoke. And the smokers had the clogged blood vessels. So 60 years later, we know that nicotine damages those blood vessels. Same thing with sugar, it does the same effect. So
damages the blood vessels. Wow.
Correct. So our type 2 diabetics, our patients who are insulin resistant, which are the majority of Americans, are accumulating plaque in their blood vessels. I'll give you a horrible statistic. You started out in Vietnam. When autopsies were done on the Vietnam vets, the average age of death in the Vietnam War was 19 years of age. And already those people, those young kids, had demonstrable plaque in their blood vessels. Now, there was a lot of smoking, as well as a lot of the MREs and that sort of thing were high in sugar.
Yeah.
So this starts at a very, very early age and catches us in our 50s and 60s. But the lipid is not to blame. It is responding to an injury. It isn't causing the injury.
Yeah, the lipid being the cholesterol.
Yeah.
So is it the nicotine in the cigarettes or all of the chemicals in the cigarettes, or both? It's
a combination of both. Mm-hmm. But I think the tobacco lobby is heavily supporting vaping because it's a profit-based thing. They say, oh no, we know cigarettes are not good for us, but vaping is wonderful. Now, the problem is here in Florida, irrespective of the disease that it causes physiologically, from a mental health perspective, I've got a lot of educators who are patients of mine. Approximately 50 to 60% of Floridian high schoolers vape on a regular basis. And that is, the CDC has statistics around 35 to 40% of high school kids vape nationwide, but that's from 2018. Post-COVID, the majority of high school kids are vaping on a regular basis. So forget about diet, forget about nutrition. That is a huge, huge mental health problem, because the only purpose of nicotine and Juul is for instant gratification, instant emotional resolution. Right. That's what it does. There's no other value to smoking or using a vape. And Juul has about 5 times the amount of nicotine per puff than the average cigarette. So we're rapidly getting our kids hooked on these drugs. And a little while ago, the government was going to ban Juul, and then suddenly they said the day before they were supposed to ban it, they said, "Oh no, let's wait, let's pump because big tobacco, the big lobbyists with all that money, said the same thing. Exactly the same is happening with cholesterol. When you have a $3.2 trillion industry, and those are 2019 statistics, or 2020 statistics, when you're making that much money off a medication, think about the opioid lobby. Think about how much money the pharmaceutical industry made selling people opioids, and funding Congress and funding the senators to not lobby against the pharmaceutical company, be it statins, be it opioids. That's what we're up against. So what we as individuals have to do is to look not at the best advice from the tobacco lobby or from the pharmaceutical companies, but we have to look at the science behind this and investigate this ourselves. At the same time, Patrick, this is important. If your doctor believes you should be on a statin, it may be because they're concerned about cardiovascular disease. So you've got to look then and say, okay, why do I have cardiovascular disease? And what can I possibly do to mitigate that if a statin is going to magically fix the problem?
Exactly. That's a good question, too, for those who believe they have some kind of damage going on in their veins and taking statins. Can they, by changing their lifestyle, heal that?
Absolutely.
Really?
You caused it, you can make it get better. And we've again got to look at the cause. If you're a smoker, make the decision to quit smoking. I mean, that's an easy one. Or you make the decision, I'm going to continue to smoke, but then I'll accept the consequences of my heart attack, my stroke, my other disease, because it's that whatever it is going to be inevitable. The same is true if you look, and this is the interesting thing, you look at the majority of people, non-smokers, who have cardiovascular disease, anywhere from 60 to 80% of their total caloric consumption is some form of sugar or starch.
Wow.
Irrespective of whether you believe that sugar or starch is healthy for you or unhealthy for you. And that we'll get to that in a few seconds.
Sure.
So, and sugar and starch is not necessary as a consumable for human survival. Your liver is very good at producing sugar, primarily from protein, as well as a little bit from one of the moieties in fat called glycerol. So we don't need to consume sugar, certainly not in large amounts, to be healthy as humans. So if 80% of your diet is a substance you don't need, and a substance that directly correlates with vascular injury, then you've set yourself up for that cardiovascular risk. And especially if you are not a high producer of a hormone called insulin. Now you're developing insulin resistance, you're developing type 2 diabetes, and so many people in my practice are unaware of the fact they have type 2 diabetes because they look like you and me, and the doctor doesn't think that a healthy, normal weight person, or I'm a little bit overweight, is going to be, but I've been 300 pounds, by the way. I've lost 102 pounds as I'm sitting here, but that we have a risk for diabetes, so they don't test for it. I just did a study on a group of Harvard medical students, 22 to 28 years of age. And we found, and they are the healthiest of the healthy group of people. And yet we found profound health issues in their biochemistry because of their diet. But no doctor would ever even have tested them, because it's inconceivable that someone who's an Olympic skier or someone who plays on a national soccer team and is that fit and that good looking could possibly have health issues.
Wow. Dr. Robert Cywes is with us, a carb addiction. I think I actually got the... well, you can use this website to find out more about him, obesityunderstood.com, and carb addiction he's got on his social media thing. So let's go to some of the basics. I still don't really understand, as many times have I heard it, this insulin resistance. So let's say that I'm eating a bunch of rice and cookies and cakes and crackers or pasta and stuff. Well, what goes on in my body that I don't know is going on that I would stop if I knew?
Okay. So let's go down this pathway. And I think this is before we even go there, there's a very, very important caveat to that, because I'm arguing against a big lobby of people that say, well, these are healthy foods. Yes, absolutely they are. A glass of red wine every now and then, absolutely healthy. Mm-hmm. But if you're drinking 2 bottles of red wine every day, problem. So the first most important thing about carbohydrates is the dose matters. There are plenty of people all over the world who subsist on small amounts of carbohydrates twice a day, but they're fighting off starvation. Those, if you eat rice twice a day in rural China, if you're eating a little bit of grain twice a day or once a day in Somalia where there's famine, those things keep us alive. They don't cause harm. So the dose matters. Just like with red wine, a glass of red wine, quite healthy. 2 bottles of red wine every day, not so much. So the dose matters, and your relationship with sugar and starch does matter. And what's happened in America, as we've forsaken and demonized fat, when you remove fat from food, food tastes like crap. So what is the productive or the industry of health of food done is it's produced a huge amount of processed carbohydrates in our diet. So the majority of people are eating a dominant amount of processed carbohydrates. As you've said, your pastas, your breads, your cookies, your cakes, and the processed carbohydrates in particular we're overdosing on them. The average American currently eats in one day the amount of carbohydrates 50 years ago we used to eat in over a month.
Really?
So it's a massive increase, a massive increase.
That's crazy.
And remember this, Patrick, the other piece that's important to understand. Well, you tell me, what's healthier for you, an apple or a donut?
Have an apple.
Right. Everybody, an apple's healthy. But here's the problem. If you're obese or diabetic, the apple has twice as much sugar as the donut, and it's exactly the same sugar. It's glucose and fructose. It's the identical molecule that enters your bloodstream. So apples are very healthy for healthy, skinny people. But if you're diabetic and you watch your blood sugar, it goes through the roof for 4 or 5 hours when you eat an apple. So that's where the dose matters.
Same thing for the donut. Same thing
correct.
for the donut.
And an apple, when you and I were young, an apple was a little sour thing this big.
Yeah.
Now it's this massive thing that lasts forever and it's full of sugar. Plus, apples used to be seasonal. Now, 24/7, you can go down to the store and buy them. So therein lies part of the challenge is how our world has evolved to give us ready access to those foods. So in the US, we've solved the hunger crisis to a certain extent by surrogating with a group of industrially manufactured carbohydrates. So that's part of the problem is that dose has become that issue. And then a lot of people have shifted away from primarily eating for the nutritional value of food toward more and more eating and using sugar as a drug, as an instant gratification drug, because it has as powerful an endorphin effect as nicotine, as alcohol, as a small dose of cocaine. So we're using sugar and starch and a process of snacking for its mental health value rather than for its nutritional value.
I see.
As it says on my mug over here, a snack is always an emotional event. And we surround ourselves with
It really is, isn't it? When you think about it.
Course,
it really is. Yeah, it really is.
I mean, if you think about it, if you smoke a cigar once a month, fantastic. Yeah. But if you're puffing on cigarettes 20 times a day, that's a problem. If you have a couple of chocolates every now and then, fine. But if you've got a handful of M&Ms on your desk and you're snacking on them the whole day, that's problematic. So we've got to look at the relationship. Don't demonize carbohydrates. Look at our relationship with them. Now, you asked me about what happens when we eat them.
Yeah.
So, and this is very important. So as sugar and starch, and whether you eat the apple or the donut, your intestine has enzymes in it that break that sugar into primary molecules, glucose, fructose, and galactose. So there are 3 primary sugars. The most common ones that we eat is a combination of glucose and fructose. Fructose being the most harmful one and the most common one in manufactured foods. And as those enter our stomach, they release a hormone that triggers the release of insulin. Most people have heard of insulin.
Yes.
And as the sugar gets into our bloodstream, insulin's job is to shove that sugar into our cells where it can be used for energy. In the liver, that energy is stored as glycogen and sometimes converted to fat. That's where our fat comes from. Obesity, fat, body fat, does not come from excessive protein or excessive fat. It comes exclusively from excessive sugar.
Okay,
So
let's slow that down a second and repeat that. Because
Repeat
the old
that.
idea, I remember in the 90s, and we were all there, this low-fat thing, and it was just crazy. And to this day, you still have a hard time getting anything but low-fat yogurt, right? I mean, the whole shelf is everything is low-fat. So the sugar
Actually,
goes...
let me make a dramatic statement.
Yeah.
It is impossible to get fat from eating protein and fat.
Impossible.
Impossible. And the reason for that is because the human body won't allow you to do that.
It won't
allow you to do that. There's too many hormonal checks and balances in that. I'll give you another example that is easier to understand. How much water, if you're really thirsty, how much water can you drink at one time?
16, 32 ounces.
No, you have no idea.
Yeah.
You have no idea. And because you don't need to have an idea. You're thirsty, you start to drink. At some point, it could be 16 ounces, it could be 20 ounces, it could be 30 ounces. A signal goes from your brain to your belly that says, Patrick, your thirst is going to stop.
Yeah, you've had enough.
And you automatically stop, and it's very difficult to overdrink water at one time.
Right.
If I give you a case of beer, and I'm not going to ask you, I've done this experiment purely for scientific purposes. I can drink 1 or 2 or 3 bottles of water, but I can flatten a whole case of beer.
Of course.
By volume, I'm not an alcoholic, but by volume, the beer is much greater. And the reason for that is because the alcohol gives me a buzz. The more I drink, the more buzzed I get, the more I can. So I'm overriding the thirst quenching signals from the beer. The water doesn't give me the buzz. Doesn't make sense? So water consumption is very tightly controlled. Alcohol isn't. At the same time, when it comes to protein and fat, let me ask you this question. I assume you're in Texas. I assume you're not averse to a little bit of steak. So,
I eat steak every day. Yeah.
Right. So let's ask you, you're super hungry, and I put an 80-ounce steak in front of you. The cow sits down. How much steak can you eat at one time?
Usually 6, maybe 7 ounces, 8
Patrick,
ounces.
you have no idea. You have no idea. So what you do is you start eating steak. There's an 80-ounce steak in front of me. At some point, oh my God, I'm stuffed. Signals have gone from your belly to your brain that says, dude, you're done.
You're done.
2 minutes later, you're not sitting in front of the TV eating more steak, but you are sitting there with a bag of chips or a bowl of ice. You're stuffed. You're full. You can't eat more steak. Your body won't let you. But you can eat a bag of chips. You can eat a bowl of ice cream. You can eat some fruit, because sugar is a drug that has no stopping point. Like beer or like alcohol, the more you eat, the more buzz you get.
So if you're full and then you're going to go to a show and you all of a sudden you go out to eat, get a steak, and then you go to the movies, and then you can eat popcorn because
there's no stopping point, and you're doing it for your brain, not for your body.
Your brain.
You're doing it for buzz. You're getting high. So I want, and it's so important that we look at this from the substance abuse perspective and from the non-biologic perspective. And I've got plenty of patients. I myself and my baby is 2 years old. We're all carnivores. And we believe we eat a ton of meat. But the reality is I've lost 102 pounds being a carnivore. And I look at my carnivore population, and they are losing weight like crazy, despite the fact that they eat massive amounts of meat, at least by their mindset. So calories, it is false, it is a fraud to talk about calories in terms of weight loss and weight gain, because the human body doesn't work that way. Because if the calories come from protein or fat, they get utilized very differently to sugar. So speaking in terms of calories immediately negates any positivity of any diet. But all diets are based on caloric reduction. That's why they fail.
I think it's fascinating that I'd never heard before in all these years that pathway between carbs in fruit and any sugar that goes to the liver, which then makes the fat, which is what causes obesity.
Correct. Exactly right.
Wow.
So because the traffic then is from liver to fat cells. If you eat fat, if you eat a big your ribeye steak that you eat every day, that fat bypasses the liver, goes straight to the fat cells, and then between meals, you use that fat is trafficking from fat cells to liver, okay, when your insulin levels are low. So you're using the fat that you ate. When your insulin is high and you need insulin to shove the sugar into your blood, into your cells, your traffic is now liver to fat cells, and insulin blocks the release of that fat from the fat cells.
Wow.
So you're hungry all the time and you replenish. So you're adding to your fat cells all the time. And, one of the things about a carnivore diet or a so-called ketogenic diet where you're not eating sugar is you stop snacking. You're not eating that often because your body doesn't need that perpetual replenishment.
Yeah.
And, if you're smoking every day, as soon as your nicotine levels drop down, you need to smoke some more. Same thing when you're eating a lot of sugar. As soon as your blood sugar levels come down, you need to replenish them. If your blood sugar levels are baseline and you're living in ketosis on ketones and you're living on fat, you don't feel hungry. So you may eat once or twice a day.
I've been testing my blood sugar in the morning since I get on a carnivore diet of 2.5 months, and it's 40 and 50, 60 some mornings.
Yeah. It's low, and yet you don't feel terrible. Most diabetics, if they're at 50,
but when I was eating carbs, if my blood sugar went to 60, I felt terrible. I needed to eat. I felt like I was going to die if I didn't eat. Isn't that interesting?
Well, Patrick, the reason for that is because instead of using sugar as your exclusive fuel source, and then when your sugar levels drop low, you feel terrible, particularly your brain, you're now using something called ketones, which is the healthiest of the energy sources. And your brain is very adept at you. In fact, your brain prefers ketones. It uses a little bit of sugar, but it prefers ketones. So if you're in ketosis, it doesn't matter that your blood sugar drops a little bit low. You feel fine.
You don't feel
that is your body's normal regulation. So let's get back to insulin. So when you eat that sugar and starch, insulin shoves that sugar into your cells. But sugar at high levels is toxic in any space you find it. So high levels of sugar is toxic to your intestine. It's toxic to your liver. We call that fatty liver. A fatty liver is not the fat that you've eaten that made your liver fat. And most Americans have fatty liver at various times. It is the conversion of sugar to fat in the liver that gives you that harmful fatty liver. So insulin causes that. And when your sugar levels increase and are perpetually increased inside of your cells, it damages your cells. So the way the cells respond is they lock the front door and throw away the key. In other words, they block the receptor for insulin. So what happens is insulin has to lock onto this receptor that opens the door and allows sugar to get into the cells. And if the cells block that receptor, insulin locks onto it, but the door doesn't open. So the cells themselves have a lower amount of sugar. It protects the cells, but now the sugar builds up in your bloodstream. So genetically, some human beings can produce huge amounts of insulin. So the pancreas says, where you produce insulin, the pancreas says to the cells, no, you lock the front door. Guess what? I'm going to throw more insulin at you. I'm going to throw the battering ram at you and break that door down so you can shove more sugar into the cells. Those people who are high insulin producers can turn sugar into fat very readily. Their blood sugar isn't very high, but they become enormous. They're so-called obesogenic because they can produce a lot of insulin. So if you see a 400, 500-pound person walking around, they're typically a very high insulin producer. They most often don't have diabetes. On the other hand, if genetically you can't produce a lot of sugar, if you become insulin resistant, if that cell locks the front door, now I don't have enough insulin. So what happens is the sugar builds up in your blood vessels, and elevated blood sugar over time damages the cells in your blood vessels. We call that diabetes. The red blood cells get damaged, and we measure that as something called hemoglobin A1C, which is sugar permanently attaching to the red blood cells. And at a certain measurement, now you have type 2 diabetes. Those patients may not be enormous, they may be overweight, but now you've got this elevated blood sugar. So the same problem, chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption, but two very different outcomes. You've got diabetes on one hand, you've got obesity on the other hand. And along with that, you've got your cancers, you've got your autoimmune disease, you've got your polycystic ovarian syndrome, you've got Alzheimer's. All of those diseases are consequences of elevated carbohydrates in our diet.
Wow. So
you cannot have type 2 diabetes if you don't eat sugar.
So a lot of the Alzheimer's and the things going on with some of the elderly population, it's probably a lack of fat and too much sugar? Could be.
Exactly right. So what happens, and I've just got my YouTube channel, Carb Addiction Doc, I'm doing an interview with one of the world's top researchers in exactly that. And I'll give you an astounding statistic here, Patrick. His name is Stephen Cunane, Professor Stephen Cunane. He's in Quebec in Canada, does phenomenal research in Alzheimer's, in brain development or Alzheimer's. So he did a study, and he was looking for people. This study happened to be in women with mild cognitive impairment. And mild cognitive impairment over time becomes Alzheimer's. Okay, just like insulin resistance over time becomes diabetes, mild cognitive impairment slowly becomes Alzheimer's. And he looked at a group of women he tested them, and they all tested positive for mild cognitive impairment. And they all also had polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is from high levels of insulin and high levels of sugar. And by getting them on a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, and he added something called MCT oil, which is a particular type of fat to their diet over 6 months, he could prove that in these women, he was able to reverse that mild cognitive impairment.
Wow.
So he was able to repair their brains, because he does studies. He does something called a PET scan on the brains and can show the damage that's happening in the brain and correlate that with cognitive impairment. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
Now, MCT.
So you're able to, but let me give you the astounding statistic, Patrick.
Okay.
What do you think the average age of these women were who had mild cognitive impairment? In other words, brain damage, reversible, but brain damage from too high a sugar and too low a fat in their diet. What is their age?
It's probably lower than one would suspect, 40 or 50.
23.
Whoa. 23?
And this is published data. You can look it up. Stephen Cunane just published PCOS paper. The average age of these women with cognitive impairment was 23 years of age. So you're already seeing measurable Alzheimer's precursor at that age. Now, the brain is phenomenal. It's got a huge capacity. So we really start to see the obvious fallout in our 50s and 60s, but it starts in the teenagers and it's measurable in our early 20s.
And this cognitive impairment is due to actually damaged cells from the sugar, the brain cell.
Correct. It's brain cell. So when a brain cell uses sugar to repair itself, all of our cells in our body are continuously getting damaged. They're continuously being repaired. It's a very fluid system. Mm-hmm. And think of the 3 little pigs. If you build your house of straw and wood, it's not so good. The house doesn't withstand the wolf blowing it down. If you build your house of bricks, it's going to withstand the wolf blowing it down, or the fox, or whatever the story is. So sugar, when you use sugar to repair your brain, and sugar can be turned to certain types of fat, that's like repairing the brain with straw and wood. Doesn't work so good. If you use fat, especially ketones, that's like the building blocks, the bricks that the brain needs, and you create a healthy brain cell. It's that simple.
Very interesting. You mentioned MCT oil. Now isn't that from coconut or so? And aren't we better off with an animal fat?
Right. So coconut oil is one of the MCT oil. It's coconut oil. In fact, his study was done with MCT. But if you're out there as a regular person, a little bit of coconut oil is a very, very healthy thing to have. The 3 vegetable oils or fruit oils that we use, because they are monounsaturated or fully saturated fat, the ones that have been demonized over the last 50 years, the 3 healthiest non-animal fat oils: coconut oil, olive oil, avocado oil.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. The manufactured ones, the ones that came from being used as engine lubricants in the Second World War that we now use in our food, the Criscos and the peanut oils and the cottonseed oils.
Canola oil.
Those are the most harmful ones. Canolas. Those are the most harmful oils because they are high in what we call polyunsaturated fatty acids or 6-omega fatty acids. And in high amounts, those things are devastating to our health.
What do they do in the body in the genre of a brain and sugar and all that, the PUFAs? What's going on when we eat those?
So again, this is an interesting concept because there are 2 types of fats. If we look at these 2, it's not in isolation. We've got 3-omega fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. And I'm simplifying this. They're anti-inflammatory. And the 6-omegas are pro-inflammatory. So let's say you're in a building and you've got a fire alarm that says, hey, there's a potential fire, and then you've got sprinklers that put the fire out responding to that alarm, okay? You need both. If you don't have the alarm, the sprinklers don't know that they should go off. If the alarm is ringing but there's no sprinkler, it doesn't matter because the fire's there. So 3 and 6-omega fatty acids work in exactly the same way. They support each other. The 6-omega fatty acids send an alert to your immune system that there's inflammation. And the 3-omegas put out the fire. They help to dumb down the inflammation. But you need a signal to say, hey, there's inflammation. Then you need a signal to put it down. So the ideal ratio of 3 to 6s should be about 1 to 1 to 1 to 3. The average American who's consuming a huge amount of those seed oils with a high polyunsaturated fatty acids, the ratio is typically 1 to 15 to 1 to 30. So you've got this massive pro-inflammatory response with no fire extinguisher. And in the brain, the healthiest fire extinguisher are the 3-omega fatty acids, which is fish oil, or DHA. That's why there's this big push to use fish oil, to eat fish, seafood, and to use fish oil, especially if you have a family history of Alzheimer's. I have a strong family history of Alzheimer's, so I really focus, both myself and my 2-year-old son, we get a bit of fish oil every day to promote that DHA, to increase that ratio.
A lot of people out there that demonize fish oil say they're just too heavy omega-3s and we don't need them all, but you disagree with that, huh?
I don't disagree.
Okay.
The research, the data does. So Stephen Cunnane and other researchers as well have done a lot of studies. And in fact, I made a mistake a while ago. I thought, okay, fish oil, let me take fish oil. And like anybody, I got the cheapest one out there. But it only had 40 milligrams of DHA in. Stephen has shown quite clearly that you need between 500 if you eat a lot of fish, at least 1,000 milligrams of DHA every day, because your body can't make it. It's a conditionally essential fatty acid. It cannot be made in high enough levels by your body. Body makes a little bit, but not enough. So taking that additional fish oil, especially if you're at risk for cardiovascular or for brain, for Alzheimer's, that's important. The other place, Patrick, where it's crucially important, and I know I'm going to step on some landmines here, and I'm totally happy. Come at me.
Okay.
If you look at the incidence of autism and autism spectrum disorders, which is about pediatric brain development, that the statistics there have gone from 1 in 15,000 kids in 1970 had a diagnosis of autism to, in 2020, it was 1 in 48.
Yeah.
Okay, massive increase. And the primary reason for that is because those developing brains need massive amounts of DHA and fish oil as a precursor to develop. And they need that fat. 65% of the human brain is fat. And again, it's a building block problem. If you don't have adequate fat for the brain, it's going to use glucose to make that fat. But that's like putting diesel in your engine as a lubricant. It doesn't work so good. They're both fossil fuels, but one is an oil made for the engine, the other is something to burn as fuel. If you use them opposite to each other in the brain doesn't develop as well.
But on the kids, could you not give them meat and butter and eggs and cheese and you'd accomplish the same thing rather than...
But Patrick, that is so bad, says the FDA, says the US Dietary Guideline. Absolutely. Okay. The reason why my son is a 95% carnivore, and he gets his whole milk, because milk has a lot of fat in it, he gets his fish oil, he eats his meat, is because of that. Is particularly for his brain development. But I'll give you another thing, for talking about kids, is almost everybody in America, all the kids now in America, at some point are going to the orthodontist for braces. Because our teeth are all skewed. None of the first world nations had bad dentition. They all had beautiful straight teeth, whether you were in Japan or the Mongols, whether they were Aborigines, the Maasai, because they ate meat at a very young age. My son, the very first thing he ate at 4 months of age was a chunk of ribeye steak, which he chewed and he gummed. He didn't have teeth at the time. But he has a well-developed jaw, strong muscles, great dentition. All his teeth were out by 10 months of age. And his teeth are very straight with little gaps so they can grow because he's chewing his food. You give babies Gerber, slop, which they just suck down. They're not chewing. They're not using their face. You know, this is not rocket science.
That's amazing. Are you familiar with a term called lipofuscin?
Yes, absolutely.
What is that?
So, you tell me what you think. What you think
it's kind of maybe fatty liver, or is it? Fatty liver kind of thing.
Right. So this is, remember earlier on, I talked about people looking for a solution to. I'll give you a background. People looked for a solution in the 1950s and 60s to stroke and heart attacks, but they'd already absolved smoking as being the cause. So it couldn't be smoking. What else can it be? Well, in the modern era, we've absolved sugar as a cause for these diseases. So now we're looking for other causes. And we blame fat in our diet. We blame lipofuscin. We blame polyunsaturated fatty acids. Lipofuscin is a molecule that is a natural, normal molecule. But in excess, it is associated with fatty liver disease and inflammatory fatty liver disease. But it is not causal to it. In other words, it's a consequence of carbohydrate consumption. It is not produced and causes it. But if you look at clogged blood vessels with fat, you may assume that it's the fat in our diet that clogs the blood vessels. The same thing. You look at high lipofuscin levels and other levels in people with AST, ALT, alkaline phosphatase, elevated levels. You say, aha, that's causing the fatty liver disease. It isn't. It is a byproduct of a dysfunctional liver.
Is that also tied in with a thing called yellow fat disease, lipofuscin?
That's exactly the same thing. So you've got brown fat and yellow fat.
Yeah.
Brown fat is the healthy fat that comes from the storage of fat. And all babies are born with a lot of brown fat, and they're in ketosis. Yellow fat is the fat that gets produced when you convert sugar to fat. And the fat droplets are a little bit different. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So one is a storage depot. The other one is a biologically necessary fat. So brown fat gets produced when you eat fat. Yellow fat gets produced when you convert sugar to fat. They're very, very different.
Very different. We have a great a great regenerative farmer, pig farmer in the farmer's market here, and he does all totally vegetables and no grains and stuff like that. And he says that the fat on his pigs is so impressive that when he gives them to a chef from England, from French and stuff, they look at it. That's the pig I want because that's the color fat I want. Isn't that interesting?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. And so you talked about lipofuscin a little bit ago. Lipofuscin is it's a molecule that gets produced along with that yellow fat. But it isn't, and now you see a lot of lipofuscin in people with liver disease or with people with massive yellow fat, and you blame that for the disease. It isn't. It's a byproduct of production. So it is produced and accumulates in these cells and may be toxic to those cells, but it didn't cause the damage. It's a consequence of the damage.
It's a consequence.
And it can be seen under the microscope. So when you look at fat and you see this under the microscope, aha, that must be the problem.
I see. Dr. Robert Cywes is with us. Patrick Timpone, OneRadioNetwork.com. We're going to do a little break. His website is called obesityunderstood.com. You can also find him on social media thing, Carb Addiction. He does that to stay connected with his people. Dr. Cywes, stay right there. We're going to do a break, and then I'm going to really dig into how is it possible that we could really get everything we need from meat. I mean, okay, so we're going to do that. It'll be fun. Stick around. We pre-recorded this show, so hold your calls and emails. Hope you're enjoying it. Santos Bonacci will be here tomorrow, Tuesday, and if you'd like to go into a sauna and have some fun, listen. Previously with cardiologist Dr. Joel Kahn, 35 years experience in cardiology.
On your commercial break, you hit a hot button because I'm a giant fan of infrared sauna and the cardiac benefits.
Tell us about why you like these saunas for the heart. What does it do?
In Japan, it's a traditional therapy of heart disease to even sick heart patients to sit for 15 or 20 minutes in an infrared sauna, then lie down and rest and hydrate for about half an hour. They call it WAON, W-A-O-N. It means soothing heat. And they've done research studies, like 30 of them in humans. Anti-ages your arteries and improves the strength of your heart, and it may actually prolong survival in sick heart patients. Anybody can just, again, go to the Internet, read about infrared sauna heart disease, or put my name there because I've written many articles about it. Now there's data coming out of Sweden and Finland because they've published some amazing data. The number of times a week you're in a sauna, number of minutes each time. You can just track out how long you're going to live. So very powerful therapy by being in, my favorite is an infrared sauna.
Well, I don't know about, thank you, Patrick. The very reason I turned that off is because we have an everyday, really great sale with this puppy, and it is the RelaxFar infrared sauna. It is made in Medical University in Taiwan. They've run several awards, and if China doesn't, or the United States, if somebody doesn't mess with Taiwan, maybe we'll still have them in the future. I don't know. Geopolitics, you never know what's going on. But they're really great units. They're very low EMFs. We measured them. We got all the fancy things. They just have some magnetic energy, like, sitting next to your refrigerator or your juicer or whatever, or when we used to juice. But they're great units, $1,295 delivered, $1,295 in the lower 48. For those of you in Petaluma, that does not include Alaska or Hawaii. And we ship them all over the world. We've shipped one to Italy a couple of weeks ago, and it comes with the proper plug. because as you know, we in this United States, we have the right plug. Everybody else has the wrong plug. I'm just kidding. Everybody has a different plug. And so we'll get you the right plug. Just email me. That's the only way to get the price. Patrick, OneRadioNetwork.com. One of the biggest sales of the year is on one of my favorite things that I take every day. I don't do a lot of supplementation, just food, but pine pollen is from trees. It's pollen, and it's on sale right now. Promo code Restore20, 20% off. Here's a little bit on pine pollen. Check it out. Recently, we asked Daniel Vitalis if taking pine pollen would dampen the body's own testosterone building mechanism.
Yeah, some research has been done to see if pine pollen would have that kind of effect, because we see that with pharmaceutical testosterone supplementation. But what they found was you'd have to take the equivalent of about 2 bottles per day of our pine pollen extract to create that kind of an effect. So it's really safe for people at any age, and we found it to be really safe for both men and women. Today, a lot of women are also looking at testosterone replacement therapy. And I think before anybody looks to the pharmaceutical industry for anti-aging therapies, for anabolic therapies, they should probably look to nature first, and they should probably look to Surthrival's pine pollen products. And not just our pine pollen gold extract, but also our pine pollen pure potency, which contains erythro root and also stinging nettle root, which helps to free testosterone that's already in the body, but has been bound up. It helps to free that in the blood.
That's my favorite, the 4 Ps, really. Yeah, that's the one I get, and it's on sale right now. Restore20. Restore20 is the promo code for 20% off. Biggest sale of the year on pine pollen. I've been taking this little guy for maybe 12, 13 years every day. Not that whatever I do is smart, because I'm crazy. I don't know what I'm doing, but, check it out. Last time I checked my testosterone, I did for fun a couple years ago. It was like 860, 870, or 900, something like that. So, I'm going to still have babies someday, and I've clocked around 76, whatever. You know what I mean. Okay, go on. It's on sale right now. Check it out. You'll like it. Whoops.
Broadcasting from the beautiful Hill Country in Texas, this is OneRadioNetwork.com.
We're having fun talking with a very interesting fellow, Dr. Robert Cywes. He is an MD and a PhD. What's your PhD in?
My PhD is actually in liver metabolism, liver transplantation. So I worked with, at a time where sugar was supposed to be the cure for all liver ailments, and was at the forefront of beginning to discover that it's actually a problem rather than an issue. So we fed livers that were ill sugar, thinking it would improve them, but it made them worse. We had to have that aha moment to realize all the stuff we believed in was incorrect. And it's so difficult for scientists who truly believe in something to realize that they're wrong and then to figure it out. So it's taken us a long time to change that. But yeah, that's my PhD. It was in liver transplantation, liver glucose biology. And we could actually see, the beautiful thing is I could actually create diabetes in the liver. I could create the diabetic vascular injury within a few hours in the liver by infusing sugar into the liver and looking at those blood vessels under the microscope.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the idea that, so if we don't have carbs and we don't have sugar, pretty much we got to eat meat, right? It's what we eat, meat and fat, butter and things like that. So as I mentioned, I've been doing this for a while, but every now and then I get a craving for a carb, just real craving. So I just have some white rice and butter. Now that craving, I'd like to ask you, because I think you understand this, is that just my body really wanting it, or it's still just a mental addiction that all I got to do is just not go there?
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with your body.
Okay.
Your body doesn't crave it or doesn't need it.
It's a mental thing.
It all happens above the eyebrows. And, every now and then, so if you look at that craving, if you step back from it and you say, why? Why do I need this right now? And the answer is almost always, I'm stressed, I'm bored, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm having fun for pleasure. It always correlates.
One of those things,
part
right?
Of emotional restitution. Yeah, I call all of those words emotional tension. And the craving is all about a little bit of unrecognized emotional tension that you need relief from. You need a surrogate.
So the craving is not my body saying, Patrick, have some rice. It is simply an image, a mind thing, and I understand the mind are really one of my specialties. It's just an old image that flashes in a state of consciousness, and I think about how it feels when you eat a carb, and that's the addiction. All I got to do is just don't pay attention to it.
Right, and I think, in your case, it may be more of an abusive relationship or even a valuable relationship. In a 300-pounder like myself, I know that's a feeling, and I still get them, that I've got to combat by not having access to that rice. Because the problem is that, one handful of rice, one serving of rice, no big deal. It causes no harm.
No.
But then again, if you're an alcoholic, one sip of beer isn't going to make you drunk. But in addiction, the threshold is the word permission. Once you grant yourself permission, you've combated a whole bunch of incredibly powerful defenses that defend against the harm of the drug. And when you cross that threshold, in other words, addicts are extremely good at distorting the reality of harm to give themselves permission to have their drug. Can you imagine rolling up your sleeve, putting a tourniquet on your arm, heating up a powder in a liquid and injecting heroin?
Wow.
There's no difference between the heroin addict distorting the reality of that ridiculousness to give themselves the high versus the average person who goes over to the fridge and piles up a whole pile of ice cream and eats it.
Yeah.
Because it's about the process. Every obese person, every type 2 diabetic knows that ice cream is probably not a good idea. So we create this distortion of reality that I know it's not a good idea, but right now, for this very valid reason, it's appropriate. There's never a valid reason for anyone to shoot up with heroin or for an alcoholic to have a drink. And there's never a valid reason for a type 2 diabetic or an obese person to eat sugar. And yet we create circumstances that validate in a distorted way our requirement for that.
When did the whole sugar thing start and carb thing in our culture as a species? Do we know, when people really started growing wheat and rice and stuff like that?
Well, I think that the initial strategy, way back, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years ago. A long time ago, pre-Egyptian culture. The Egyptians were the most successful. In fact, if you look at some of the foreign language use, the Greeks, for example, I believe it's the Greeks, called the Egyptians bread lovers. Because sarcophagia, which is because they were grain consumers. Now, they did that so that they could reliably store food through drought. And so our migration away from animals toward a farming culture and potentially a herding culture was really about survival. And we human beings, really what defines us as humans, our bodies are pretty pathetic relative to the animal species. Our brains define that. And our brains evolved because of our consumption of marine fat. So we evolved along shorelines. And it's smart. Shorelines, you've got access to fish, you've got access to seafood, you've got access to kelp and that kind of thing. You've got access to animals that come down to drink water at the shoreline. And if you live on a shoreline, you've usually got good water at a lake shoreline, water for agriculture. So we started developing control over plants and control over animals. And that's what defines us as humans. We became farmers and ranchers, and we built up a reliable storage of products. Well, most plants don't store very well, but grains do. And we became a grain-based culture. And yet our ability to store grains was far faster than our genetic transformation to tolerate those grains. For eons, we moved away from being vegetarian animals to be more carnivorous, which allowed our brains to grow. There's also another principle behind being more carnivorous, is that if you think about a vegetarian animal, cows have vegetable material, plants have very, very poor nutrient quality. So therefore, you have to spend a lot of time eating a huge amount of plants to be able to get adequate nutrition. So cows will graze for 12, 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't give them a lot of time to watch Netflix movies. So what we human beings did is we started eating much, much more nutrient-dense animals, which gave us a massive bang for buck in a very short period of time so that we could do other things. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. So be productive and be strong. I'm finding that with this, just eating steak and meat, steak and butter and eggs. I'm writing screenplays as my second job, and I get a lot more done. I have more clarity. I can eat at night and stay up for 6, 7, 8, 10 midnight working. If I eat pasta, at 7 o'clock, I'm done. Boop.
Right.
An hour later, right? I'm just the best I can do is watch a movie. If I'm lucky and don't fall asleep. Wow.
Well, the interesting thing about a carbohydrate load is sugar is very hygroscopic. It sucks up water. So if you eat that big carbohydrate
sucks up
meal,
water. Wow.
Sugar sucks up water. Think about it. If you take sugar, you can dissolve it in tea.
Yes.
You can't dissolve fat in tea. It's float. It's separate. Right. So what happens when we eat sugar, every molecule of sugar has 6 carbons. Each one requires attachment to 1 molecule of water. So every molecule of sugar requires 6 molecules of water. So you eat that goes around your blood system, it goes to your brain, and your brain lives in a closed box. So even a small amount of swelling of your brain causes basically like a little minor concussion, is the lay word of looking for it. So after we've had a big carbohydrate meal, you go out for lunch, the least productive workforce is in the hour or two after lunch, because they're all kind of dealing with a minor concussion. You go out for lunch and you have a steak, or you eat some chicken. You just, as you said, you're productive. You're wired, you're productive. Or what you find is that you've eaten enough in a short period of time. My steak last night will see me through till dinner tonight. I've stored that. My insulin level is low. I'm now able to use my fat stores. I don't need to eat because I've got that food inside of me. So now I have time to be productive without spending time in the kitchen or grazing. So I'm much more productive on a carnivore-based diet, or really a ketogenic-based diet.
Okay, we'll talk about the difference, but for me, this is so fun because I am not hungry anymore. I'm just not hungry, and I just don't eat until I get hungry again, and so I don't care what time it is. And when I get hungry, then I eat. I mean, it's pretty fun, right? Rather than saying I have to have lunch and breakfast and dinner. Do you just eat once a day now?
I plan to eat twice a day, but whether I eat twice a day or once a day really depends on how busy I am. No. If I'm really busy, there's plenty stored. Okay, I'm not going to die of anorexia if I skip that meal. No. And even if you're fairly skinny, you've got enough stores in your fat cells to survive to the next meal. That's the beauty about being human. So when your insulin levels are low and your glucagon levels are high and you're living on fat suppresses appetite. And then every now and then you feel hungry. And that hunger says, okay, I need to eat. But you know what? Here's an interesting concept, Patrick. For the most part, when people say they're hungry, it has nothing to do with nutrition. In the old days, when you were younger and we lived on the plains of Africa and we said, I'm hungry, it meant we had to grab our bow and arrow, grab our digging stick and go and find food. Right. Our bodies needed food. Right. In the modern era, certainly in the last 40 or 50 years, the majority of people spend their entire existence within 50 yards of an abundance of food. Hunger no longer equates with nutritional deficit. Wow. Hunger has become the same as I need a cigarette. When someone says, oh, I need a cigarette, it doesn't mean that they're not breathing very well. It means that they've got some emotional tension. They need relief. Nicotine gives them that relief. When an obese person will die, oh, I'm hungry, they're not saying my selenium levels are low. What they're saying is I'm a little stressed, I'm a little bored, I'm a little anxious, I need relief. I need to eat something to give me that emotional relief. That's why a snack is always an emotional event, because it gives us that little mind-cleansing moment. But it's an instant gratification mechanism that, when accumulated, causes harm in the back end.
So you're suggesting that in modern times, we're around breakfast time or lunchtime, that subconsciously and consciously we think it's just time to eat, and that's pretty much what people think about hungry.
Correct. And, you've got a dog. How often do you feed your dog?
Once a day.
Once a day. Most people feed their dogs once or twice a day. So what happens if the dog gets hungry at lunchtime? It doesn't get hungry at lunchtime because it's not part of its feeding routine.
My dog doesn't say, Patrick, it's lunchtime. And you know what's interesting about my dog, and she's right here, she'll skip meals all the time, and sometimes 2 days in a row. Seriously,
right,
just
because
no
she's
food.
She's eating nutritionally, not eating emotionally. Yeah. Whereas, if you've got that little yappy dog that you're feeding, a little snack for you, a little snack for me, that dog's entire life has become engaged from an emotion management perspective to receiving food. or receiving little treats. If your dog gets hungry in the middle of the day, it can chase the mailman. But it doesn't need
Well, let's
food
talk about meat. I give her organic grass-fed meat, maybe every now and then an egg in there or something like that, extra fat. Sometimes I put in there her so she eats good, well, but that's all she eats. So, so do we know for sure? I guess, there's too many people just doing carnivore, and you are, and that having a steak with fat and maybe butter, we're good. It's got everything we need. Is that true?
Well, no, it's not true.
Okay.
And I think this is a very important point, is that at first, going very narrow on what you're eating, is we usually go carnivore. The primary purpose for most people going carnivore is to correct a problem, diabetes or obesity or some sort of problem that came out of eating sugar. So it's not like we're already very healthy and we want to be a little healthier. Yeah. Most people are eating it for a purpose. So we're willing to make sacrifices to our nutrition to drop weight or to correct insulin resistance. So the first goal of a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet has a therapeutic role where we accept certain other deficiencies because we need to get rid of very quickly our excess weight or our diabetes. So correction of disease, the therapeutic application of a carnivore diet is very useful for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. However, and we usually have adequate stores that we can survive certain micronutrient deficiencies with that as an objective. And the carnivore diet is the most effective diet, anti-inflammatory diet. So if you've got Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, acid reflux, it goes away very quickly. If you've got obesity, if you've got diabetes, the carnivore is the most radical but the most effective way to do it. Difficult to do and miserable at first. However, my veteran carnivores need to look at two separate things. Number one, the carnivore diet provides macronutrients, protein and fat, in abundance, the calories, in abundance. What a narrow carnivore diet may do is leave you eventually with nutrient deficiency. So one of the things I work with my patients, eat as much steak as you want to, I don't care. But let's also focus on a range of micronutrients. So you're getting your minerals, your vitamins, your trace elements, as you said earlier on, from your food, where it's supposed to come from. So I'm not going to tell people to eat something they don't want to eat, but in the carnivore space, the micronutrient options you have, eggs are that's my vitamin. So eggs are one of the healthiest things you can eat, despite what conventional doctors say because of the cholesterol. The only two things that are missing in eggs, because an egg becomes a chicken, but we don't eat the shell typically. So calcium is deficient and vitamin C is deficient. So if you then are comfortable using dairy, now dairy may slow down weight loss, but dairy has everything in it to grow a baby, to grow a baby cow. So dairy has all the calcium that you need. So dairy and eggs are a wonderful condiment to add to your food as your vitamin.
Cool.
The other place we get a huge range of metabolically healthy vitamins and minerals is liver. So some people hate eating organs. Some people don't mind eating organs, but liver and kidneys are the organs that some people will eat as their vitamin store. The other place we can get it is from small fish and seafood. So your sardines, your oysters, your mussels, your clams, your shrimp. If you eat the whole animal, those small fish, they have huge, broad range of everything. Excellent. And again, you can set yourself up. If you don't like fish, but you eat eggs, that's fine. You don't have to eat them all. But the more broad your carnivore diet is, the better. So having that broader carnivore diet where you focus on your micronutrient consumption. And, when I say eat sardines, you may eat sardines for a meal, but it may be I'm eating my steak, but I'm going to have 1 or 2 oysters with my steak. Sure. And smoked oysters are fine, or 1 or 2 sardines with it. Or I'm going to make myself some hamburger. I don't like liver, but I'm going to take a chicken liver. I'm going to buy 12 pounds of hamburger, and I'm going to make my own burgers, and I'm going to throw some salt and some liver in there and camouflage it. So there are ways to do this. Even if you don't like liver, you can get it in without
Excellent. So the idea with the eggs and then the small fish and things that'll round out, and maybe dairy. Like I'm doing raw goat's milk. Raw goat's milk. Does that get it?
Absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. In fact, that's one of the few substitutes that works fairly well instead of breast milk for babies. With this whole formula crisis, raw goat's milk is actually was one of those few things that for a while, cow's milk doesn't work so good for human babies. The closest we can come is goat's milk. And at least during that crisis, if you could access it, that was a reasonable surrogate.
If we can get raw butter and use that as the extra fat, is that the same as getting maybe just some extra fat at the farmer's market and cooking that up? We have access to that here, or does the butter do it if you just want to do the butter and a little bit of fat on the ribeye?
Butter, ghee, tallow, lard are excellent. But here's the key thing. Early on, when you're trying to get into ketosis, when you're trying to suppress appetite, adding a decent amount of fat to your food and going very high in fat is ideal. People add butter to their coffee or whatever it may be.
Sure.
However, over time, you really only want to eat the fat that comes with the food. So if you're eating a ribeye steak, it's fine to grill a ribeye steak in a little bit of butter, but don't go and add a ton of it to it. If you're going to eat a filet, add some butter, add some cheese, add some bacon, add a piece of egg to it. So you really want to fortify with fat. You don't want to load up with fat. But you always want to have fat with your food. Mm-hmm. The only interesting thing with my carnivore veterans, and this is what we're seeing with people that are 2-5 years out on a carnivore diet, they are so fat adapted, they are so good at using fat in their diet, they don't necessarily produce insulin. So in those folks, way down the road, we have to find triggers for insulin. And that's time for a whole different discussion. So you asked me about the carnivore diet.
Wow.
It isn't a thing. It's an evolving entity. And that's where you want to align yourself with a healthcare provider who understands what you're doing so they can measure where you are and work to the next level. Does it make sense? So
that's what you do with your people, and you're very busy. We had to do this on a weekend because you work all day, 5 days a week, and you're talking with people all over the world, and you kind of consult with them and work with them to get everything that they need. So there's a time when, would you feel, though, if you needed to adapt with some different ways to get the insulin up, would I feel that?
Absolutely, yes. And that's we use blood work to evolve this. So I'll do blood work on someone to begin with. They're profoundly insulin resistant. We slowly get them toward. We don't start with the carnivore diet. We slowly evolve toward it. If they choose to, they can be ketogenic as well if they want to. Results are slow, but as good. And then we follow the insulin resistance until it becomes insulin sensitive. But then over time, they may become insulin suppressed, where they're no longer releasing insulin. And now you're starting to feel crappy, your blood sugars are going up, you may actually gain a few pounds in weight. And that is because your body's taking excess protein, turning it to sugar. That's where sugar comes from in a carnivore diet. That's why you don't need to eat sugar, because your body will use a little bit of that protein. But if you're so busy using fat, you don't use that sugar, then you turn it into fat, and it kind of goes off a little bit. So we bring that back. Now we trigger insulin, and you can then use a little bit of that sugar together with your ketones. You want to be in about a 70-30 ratio of ketones to sugar in terms of what your body uses for fuel and as a substrate. But I think the other key thing is the body does not work this way. Most nutritionists think in terms of this we use for fuel, this we use for tissue building.
Oh, yeah, I haven't stopped recording.
So what we're typically looking for is about a 70-30 ratio of ketones to sugar. Okay. And if you look at the brain, the science tells us, the research, and I don't like that word because it's been so demonized by so many people that hide behind science to sell stuff. So Stephen Cunnane has proven in his laboratory that about 90% of the fat in our brain actually comes from ketones. And the brain uses these small little building blocks as bricks to build bigger fats. So that's where the healthy fats come from. And if you're using sugar to do that, as we said before, it is not the ideal substrate. But so if you are in a ketogenic diet, if you are a carnivore, you're producing tons of ketones. You're producing enough sugar for the sugar-dependent tissue. But for the most part, most of our body requires ketones. However, you need insulin to get some of that sugar into cells. And if the insulin is suppressed, we have to trigger that in our carnivore veterans. So that's really the language that we speak. So it is an evolving pattern of diet based upon where you are. And with blood work, we can measure that in our patients and make corrections at the appropriate time. So it really is a feedback system of knowing where you are on the journey. Where you are right now, you're feeling great. You're still probably in the process early on of correcting insulin resistance. And it's getting better and better and better. But it takes quite a while for the body to repair itself fully. You don't do something today and suddenly you're happy and healthy. It slowly has to correct itself.
So are you suggesting that, Patrick, here, I'm going to continue to feel better and better and more energy than I have today?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Patrick, so you get better and better and better, and then you reach a steady state where it's just who you are. And you say, well, you know what? You're still going to have some flat days, some good days. But then you go back and you screw up and you eat something you shouldn't. And then you realize how awful you actually feel.
Yeah. So my on-ramp to this whole thing, I saw an interview with a Sally K. Norton about oxalates, right? And she just captured my imagination, Doc. I said, man, maybe this girl knows what she's talking about. So a lot of the carnivore people, and we've had Chafee and other people on, and Dr. Klitz, something like that, a really cool guy, I liked him a lot, is that, it's Kiltz, rather, Kiltz.
Yeah.
That all of these plants have oxalates and other chemicals that they put out because they don't want to be eaten. So what are you in vegetables? Do you think that we need them? Do you eat them? Do you suggest your patients eat vegetables?
I think this is where, again, genetically people are somewhat different. An interesting comment is that no mammal tolerates grain products.
Right.
All mammals have what we call celiac disease that irritates the intestine. Now, obviously, we'll bring, and in Texas they do a lot of this, they'll bring cows into a feedlot and feed them grain products to fatten them up. Think about that, Patrick. We bring cows into feedlots to fatten them up. Yeah. How is that different from us going to McDonald's to fatten up? But those grain products will also trigger an inflammatory response in the intestine. And sometimes we can tolerate it so it doesn't bother us. Grains don't bother me, but other people have profound reactions to it, and they are so-called celiac disease or gluten intolerant. But at a subclinical or a clinical level, the plants defend themselves by creating a reaction. However, at the same time, a lot of those plants have an enjoyment value. They don't necessarily have a nutrition value. So if you can tolerate them, they're fine to eat in small amounts. If they cause intolerable disease, guess what? Stay away from it. If you've got a lot of inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, acid reflux, stay away from them. Do the experiment. And then if you want to try again, you can reintroduce that, have a salad, see how that works. If the salad makes you feel terrible, stay away from it. That's logical. The only comment about Sally Norton is that while plants have a lot of oxalates in them, human beings genetically evolutionarily have lost the capacity to ferment plants. Cows and gorillas, who are vegetarian animals, use their stomachs or their colons to ferment plants so that they can absorb them. We use bacteria in our intestine, those animals do, to ferment the plants so they can absorb them. Human beings are enzyme digesters. In other words, our entire biology consists of using enzymes, not fermentation, to extract nutrition from our food. So a lot of those plants just pass through us unchanged. Yeah. And the oxalates guard with them. The primary source of oxalates in the human body, harmful toxic oxalates, do not come from our diet, at least not directly. There's something called the Krebs cycle, which is the cycle where you turn sugar into energy. Okay? And as part of that, as one of the carrier molecules, we've got something called oxalic acid. And if you've got too much sugar coming in and too little ATP or AMP to pick it up on the other side, the body spins off those oxalates. And in the human body, the dangerous oxalates come from production by the liver when it's trying to handle sugar, particularly fructose, in excess. It does not come from the consumption of oxalates in large amounts from our food. Wow. Does that make sense? So, I know Sally Norton very well. I dispute some of the rationale. It's as easy to say, well, we're eating fat, therefore it clogs our arteries. There's a lot of oxalates in food, in plants, therefore it must be clogging our vessels. Because if I put people just on a pure fructose diet, the oxalic acid levels can go up. irrespective of no plants. So it is a production issue, not a consumption issue. Having said which, there are extremely few plants that we eat that are natural.
Really?
Think about this. Human beings have hybridized plants to make them edible. And it's a beautiful study you can do. You can go to Dr. Google and just Google ancient grain, ancient watermelon, ancient banana. They were these, corn used to look like wheat, even more pathetic than wheat. And we hybridized it to produce bigger, more productive seeds. So there are very, very, very few foods that we eat in the plant kingdom that are natural, that are the way they grew in nature. You know, blueberries used to be tiny little things this big, sour. Yeah. Now we've hybridized them to be these big, juicy things. And they're not full of nutrients, they're just full of more sugar.
Interesting. Can I get you to move to your right a little bit? I want you more on the side
right?
of the
yeah. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I was wondering which way to move there.
With Dr. Robert Cywes, MD and PhD. The PhD, again, was in liver
metabolism, transplant, liver metabolism.
Wow, so you really understand this. I'm trying to think about some of the questions that would be coming in if we were live, because we're recording this. I'm thinking, what about salmon? Is salmon a reason? It's got omega-3s, reasonable?
Salmon, if you can tolerate, is one of the healthiest foods you can eat. So, including marine food, including fish and seafood in your diet, if you tolerate, if you like it, is one of the healthiest things you can do. And while salmon is, wild-caught salmon is one of the healthiest things you can eat, even if you eat the farm-raised salmon, is it ideal? No. But if you can afford it, I'd rather you eat salmon of any kind than eat pasta, if that makes sense.
And why is salmon good for you? I mean, there's so many people out there now talking about all these omega-3s aren't good for us, but...
Well, because the human brain cannot exist without omega-3s. And I've got a little table right here on my desk. So if you look at wild pink salmon, it has around 740 milligrams. For 85 grams of salmon, it has 740 grams of DHA, which is that essential or conditionally essential fat for our brains and for our blood vessels. So one portion of salmon has almost as much as you need in a day, and the liver can quite easily produce that other 260 milligrams. So one portion of salmon, of wild-caught salmon. But if you go to the regular salmon, farmed salmon, we're looking at 595 grams up to 600 grams. So the difference is not that much if you can't afford. What I tell my patients is this: buy the healthiest, most naturally raised meat you can afford.
Sure.
But if you can't afford it, at least buy meat. Don't say, well, I can't afford meat, go and buy crap.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that leads us to this idea of, I was looking at trying to find an organic, grass-fed, grain-finished beef just to get a little more fat, but it doesn't sound like that's a good idea, even if it's organic grain, huh?
Correct. Early on, it's reasonable to increase your fat consumption, but where you are right now, as long as you're eating that beef, I'd rather, if you can afford it, go grain-fed, at least grass-fed, grass-finished.
Grass-finished.
We talked about the lipofuscin and the yellow fat before. Well, whether you're a cow or a human, you're producing the same type of fat. That fat is different than the fat that comes from eating pasture.
Yeah.
Same thing with eggs. Ideally, you should get free-range or pasture-fed eggs, but if you're going to get battery eggs, it's still better to eat a battery-fed egg. What I tell people is this: if you hatch an egg from a chicken in a battery, or hatch an egg from a chicken that was pasture-raised, it's still going to become a chicken.
Yeah.
It's still enough to support life.
Exactly. So then what about the food? Like we can get chickens with eggs with soy-free and organic grain, and that's cool. But in general, when cows or species eat things that are maybe GMO grains and such, non-organic, does that go and get into us? I mean, is that an issue for us?
Well, the issue with GMO stuff is that it typically has been produced to remove a disease issue from them. It's not going to cause additional things. So I don't want to get into this whole, it's too emotive for me to get into the whole GMO side of things. I try to get source food that is mostly natural, but GMO is not all bad. It depends if the motive is for profit or truly to eradicate a health issue. Does that make sense?
What about Senef's work and the glyphosates and the sulfur cycle and all that stuff? And,
and that's what I don't want to get into, because I think the trickle-down effect, the reality is this, Patrick, that if you can eliminate those things, it's fine. But for the most part, given what we're doing to the air quality, if you breathe, you're probably getting more crap in your lungs per breathful than you'll ever get in your food.
That's right. Probably. So, if we, just kind of fight the battles you can win or something like that, what's the saying? Yeah.
Exactly. I have an issue sometimes. Look, if you're able to be puristic, that's fine. But most of us, good enough is good enough. And the first shift is to eliminate the sugar and starch from your diet. Then you can migrate to eating some plants and animals, and then maybe if you're okay with it, let go of the plants and migrate toward the animals. The quality of the animal is ideal, but it's not critical. So
let's talk about the important.
The better.
Let's talk about the important stuff, and that's pooping. Poop.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. When I was doing really organic foods, a little bit of rice, a little fish, some baked potato, a little fruit, I would poop 2, 3, 4 times a day. I mean, it was just coming out, which is pretty good, I guess, because people say it's a good thing. But now, sometimes with just meat and eggs and butter and some goat's milk, maybe every other day, pooping. But you know what? I don't feel bad. If I was not pooping a lot, eating all this other stuff. So I guess the question is, with all those other things I was eating when I was pooping 3 times a day, it was just going back out. I mean, did I even need them?
Correct.
Did I even need them is what I've been thinking about. It's like, whoa, what's up with that?
Well, okay, so let's look at a few facts. This is just logic, okay? If you look at babies, you take 2 types of babies. You get formula-fed babies and breastfed babies.
Right.
Formula-fed babies poop much more often and much more voluminously than typically the breastfed babies.
Oh, do they?
They do. And one of the big differences between formula and breastfed, again, this is where humans have said, aha, we know more than God and nature, because ideally formula should be as close to breast milk as it can possibly be.
Right.
Because breast milk is there for a reason. It's the healthiest food a baby can eat. And I don't think there's any argument there. But what we've done is we said, okay, let's take formula and make it better. So what did we do with formula in our wisdom? We took saturated fat out. We lessened the protein. We increased the carbohydrates. And we added something to formula that does not exist in breast milk.
Oh.
You know what that is?
No.
Fiber. There is no fiber. There is no fiber in breast milk. So if fiber was necessary for the human intestine, then every baby should explode.
Wow.
Okay?
And there's no fiber in meat, right? There's no fiber in meat.
There's no fiber in meat. So what we've done is we've added fiber to baby's formula because in our wisdom as humans, we think we're better than nature and God, and we have added fiber in because it's necessary. Well, fiber does help you to poop. It helps cows and gorillas to poop. But if you're a lion or a pure carnivore, fat, salt, and water make very healthy poops. Now, let's look at humans when they're older. The human small intestine is the longest small intestine in the animal kingdom. Okay, so you've got the stomach, you've got the small intestine, then the colon.
Yes,
and the humans have and the reason for that is because we have become primarily enzymatic in our digestion of food. So when you eat meat, the majority of the meat is digested enzymatically and absorbed. There's very, very little residue. The residue that comes
that's why
out
you don't poop
bottom,
as much. There's nothing left.
Correct. The residue that comes out the bottom is some waste products that get released into the gut higher up, bile and that kind of thing, and then maybe a little bit of gristle. Now, if you're a lion and you're eating the fur and the skin of the animal, if you look at a lion's poop, it stinks to high heaven, but it's this little white and black molecule or little white and black turd. And I come from Africa. I know what lion poop looks like.
What lion poop
and
looks like.
You'll see the hair, but it's all just residue. And lions do not get colon cancer. They don't get diverticulitis. They don't get all that irritable. So I will tell you, I'll go down a limb here and I will tell you that the cause of a lot of our colon issues, colon cancers, diverticulitis, hemorrhoids, is because we believe that fiber is necessary in our diet, and it isn't, rather than the lack of fiber. The conventional doctors will tell you when you've got diverticulitis, eat more fiber. I will tell you exactly the opposite.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
so
sir.
No fiber, no diverticulitis. So if my son, for example, is being raised, he's been a carnivore since before he was an embryo. Okay. My wife was mostly carnivore before we conceived the baby.
Wow.
So he's been carnivore his entire life. He poops completely normally and small volumes and absolutely fine, hasn't exploded yet. And he consumes very, very little fiber.
How often does he poop?
He poops anywhere from once every other day to a couple of times a day.
Every other. And the fascinating thing about it, when I was doing all the sugar and carbs, if I didn't poop more than once a day, I felt terrible. You know what I mean? I felt bloated and I needed to poop. And you started to take stuff to go make you poop, which I'm looking back on it now was crazy.
Well, think about this. What the colon does with vegetables is it has to ferment them. It has to ferment. When you eat a salad, what comes out is not salad. But what comes out is poop. So that's all fermentation by bacteria in the colon that creates that awful...
In the colon, it ferments it.
In the colon, there's fermentation. And that fermentation is acidic. It produces a lot of very unnatural chemicals that's toxic to the colon. So now we're getting irritable bowel, we're getting inflammation, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, cancers. Wow. Those are from those things. I'll give you a little experiment that we did with my son. Yeah. It wasn't an experiment. It was just one of those things. But as I said, he's almost a pure carnivore. And a while ago, we actually in South Africa.
Excuse me, how old is he? Just for...
He's 2. He's not even 2. He's turning 2 later this month.
Okay.
So, but we were at my mother's place in South Africa, and she had some mixed vegetables. So she had some corn, peas. It's like you go to Publix and you buy the mixed veg mixture, and little cube stuff. Yeah. And he had a few handfuls of it. And we were in the pool. Now it may shake up your audience a little bit, but the next day or later that night, we were in a swimming pool. And he's a 2-year-old, so he still wears a swim diaper. He's not potty trained yet. Right. And I looked and I saw some peas and corn floating in the water. Oh, what's that? And he basically had pooped out intact.
It went right through.
And the reason he did that is because his whole microbiome, everyone talks about the microbiome. His whole microbiome is carnivore based. It's the bacteria, the funguses, and the virus in his gut is designed to break down meat. It is not designed to break down vegetables because he doesn't have fermentation bacteria. So when he ate these vegetables, once he ate, he had nothing to break them down. Wow. And the enzymes couldn't break them down, so they just went right through. And that was just an interesting little N of 1 experiment. We didn't do it intentionally, but it was just, and then I had to sit down and think, okay, why did this happen? And it happened because if a regular person who eats a lot of vegetables eats those, sometimes they come out whole, but for the most times they don't. They just form, because you've got the bacteria to digest them. Right. And that's why we have 2 separate sets of bacteria. We've got one for carnivores and one for vegetarian people. And the 2 are very different. They're very distinct. And one is associated with higher levels of disease. The other one is associated with higher levels of health.
Are you suggesting then longtime carnivores, if they would go to Publix and get some of those mixed vegetables frozen, organic, and eat them, that they would just come out?
You do the experiment, Patrick, and let me know.
I will.
And I can tell you, yes. Yeah.
I was talking to a dear friend of mine and telling about this and the carnivore thing, and she said, well, it was an interesting question. Aren't meat and dairy and all that really acidic, and we have to have enough alkaline to make everything happy? Can you answer that question? When she posed to me?
Yes. Yeah. It's absolute rubbish. Okay, absolute rubbish. And the reason for that is this: the esophagus is alkaline. So our saliva is alkaline. The human stomach is one of the most acidic stomachs of any species. Wow. We take our pH down to about 3 or 4. So we acidify the food, which kills a lot of the bacteria and things. Some gets through. Then as soon as the food enters the upper small intestine, we produce about 1.5 liters of bile per day, about half a gallon of bile a day, no matter what you're eating and drinking. And bile is super alkaline. So we alkalinize our food. So the stomach breaks the food down into this mush, slop. And then we infuse the bile to neutralize the stomach acid and to alkalinize the food. And then all of our digestion happens in an alkaline environment. When vegetables get to the colon, some of those colons, and the colon is very alkaline, sometimes the metabolism by those bacteria acidify whatever we eat, whether it's vegetables or meat, and that acidification process is harmful. But if you're a carnivore, that meat, the pH of the meat doesn't matter because the intestine changes the pH along the pathway.
So if you're eating a ribeye steak and not much comes out, where does it all go? I mean, there's
to
like
your muscles, to your fat cells, to your liver, to your body.
I'm actually getting some more little muscles here, and I don't do much of anything. I do some exercises, push-ups, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. And if you look at my son, he's at the 97th percentile for height and the 95th percentile for weight. But he has calf muscles that are like two little hamburgers in his calf. He is so muscular. And we compare him to his cohort of Gerber-raised babies. They're just fluffy and fat. They look, they look like sharp-eyed dogs. They've got all this excess skin and fat, but no muscle. And I mean, he's not a special kid. It's just based on his diet. But he is a block. I mean, he could play running back. Dallas is not so good right now. So he could be a running back for Dallas next week. He's that sizable. I mean, he's just this solid kid. Well, you can go to my wife's page. It's called she's called Carb Addiction Mom on Instagram and
Carb
Facebook.
Addiction Mom. Let me write that down.
And you'll see pictures of our son, and you'll also see what we eat. And,
cool.
And you'll see kind of some of the stuff there. But he is solid with muscle. So where does the ribeye steak go? Get buck naked in the mirror. That's where it went.
That's where
everything you see is made by ribeye steak.
How does he chew it up? Do you do like some of the animals do it? You chew it and put it in his mouth?
He's had a full set of teeth since 10 months of age because your teeth.
Wait. He's got a full set of teeth at 2 years old?
He had them at 10 months. By 10 months, he had all 20 of his teeth.
Whoa. Is that unusual?
The first baby step. It's much earlier. Now, some kids will have a few teeth, but his cohort, when he had a full set of a full mouthful of teeth, a lot of his peers, same age, had maybe their front teeth or maybe their bottom teeth. Mm-hmm. But because if you're drinking milk and eating Gerber products all day long, you don't need teeth. But
so
he needed teeth because
what did you give him early on besides breast milk? Did you start introducing meat?
At 4 months of age, he ate his first piece of ribeye steak and basically eats everything I eat. So, I mean, when last did you see a 2-year-old eat oysters and mussels and, he'll eat everything. He eats liver. He doesn't like his liver so much. His mom always jests with it because I like liver. But he'll eat everything. He eats everything we eat.
And how long did he breastfed?
No, that was an issue. My wife was unable to breastfeed for very long, so he breastfed for 6 weeks, and it was a challenge. So we actually imported because breast milk in America is basically baby milkshake. It is not good for babies. So we actually imported our milk from Europe, and on my wife's page you can see that. So, but by 4 months he was starting to eat meat.
So if your wife was carnivore, in theory, a great diet, how come she couldn't breastfeed longer? Did you figure that out?
She's had surgeries on her breasts that preclude her adequately producing breast milk. So, and she's very public about that, which is one of the things she was very sad about, and actually had quite bad postpartum depression because of it. But we did the best we could to keep him healthy. So we still believe that breast milk is the best. If you can't for social reasons or for physical reasons, there are surrogates. And so we found that, but we also started feeding him very early. And now, the other thing also that may disgust a lot of people, Patrick, that you asked, how does he eat? Now, for several months, he didn't have teeth. So we would pre-chew his food and give it to him. Guess what he's getting? He's getting all my enzymes. He's getting all my bacteria. And everywhere in the world, that's what animals do.
That's what animals do.
My part of the world.
I've seen videos. They do
it. Exactly.
They do it.
So, but that's disgusting. So, and instead, here, let's open up a can of Gerber and give him Gerber mush.
And isn't it fascinating, this whole thing about the baby formula? And I was writing on my Facebook, it's better, just don't eat that stuff. Do something else.
Absolutely.
Just buy goat's milk or even cow's milk, organic cow's milk.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a big deal between pasteurized butter, pasteurized goat's milk, pasteurized cow's milk, and raw? Do you think it's a...
I think that, well, the reason we pasteurized food, or pasteurized milk and other foods, is because of the bacterial level. And in fact, Louis Pasteur worked with a disease called cowpox, which was a virus that occurred in the milk. Well, our days of that are long gone. As long as you buy a clean source of milk, raw is always best. I mean, I remember growing up in South Africa, my parents had some goats and some cows, and I'd be lying under the udder, literally milking it, that warm milk into my mouth. Not all the time, but that's what we had. It's even worse than that. So we've got the pasteurization. Is there a huge difference? Probably not. If you can access raw, it's ideal, but make sure you know where the source is. But pasteurized or raw is not as much an issue. America is one of the few countries where we take the milk out of the cow or the goat, and then we separate off the cream, because fat is so bad for you. So whole milk in this country is not what came out of the cow. They've removed the fat. So in fact, when I go back home to South Africa, we have something called full cream milk, which is the milk that came out of the cow. It's been pasteurized, but it's the exact much, much higher layer of cream. In this country, we have to buy heavy cream and add it in, and even the heavy cream's got stuff in it. So it is not ideal. So if you can get raw milk, the value is not just the fact that it wasn't pasteurized, but the value is also in the fact that it's been unseparated. It is what came out of the cow or the goat, and that's the value. Does it make sense?
Yes, sir. Robert Cywes, thanks so much for your time, and I really overstayed our welcome here. We've gone almost 2 hours, but thank you. Before we go, I'd like to go back a little bit to the DHA and the omega-3s and how much we need. I mean, so much negative things have been said about fish oils on my show. People I've talked to, these things are dangerous, they're toxic, too much omega-3s. You don't agree with that, right? And how much, do I need to get omega-3s just eating butter and eggs and meat? Do I need to get some more omega-3s in there?
My position, and this is not my position, this is what I've learned from the scientists that are doing this work.
Okay.
Is that the requirement of the human brain is around 1,000 milligrams per day.
1,000 milligrams of DHA?
1,000 milligrams a day.
DHA?
Every day. Okay. Every day. That's the ongoing 24/7 requirement by the brain. A small amount is made by the liver, but then you need the EPA, the other precursors for that. But the liver cannot produce that amount. So therefore, DHA is what we call a conditionally essential nutrient. We have to consume it in our diet because we can't make enough. Some is stored in our fat cells, so a carnivore will store a higher level of DHA in your fat cells, and as those fat cells get broken down between meals, you release that DHA. If you're insulin resistant, you're not releasing that fat cells, so you're at an even greater deficit because you can't access those stores. So therefore, the next best place to get DHA from is your butter, your eggs, and particularly the highest concentration of DHA is in marine food, your fish, your seafood, your shellfish.
But we do get a butter and eggs. And
you do get a small amount, but not enough. So I fairly heavily focus on adding seafood to my food.
Okay.
Sometimes I eat pure seafood. Sometimes I'll have a piece of salmon with my steak, or some oysters with my steak, or some mussels with my steak, or some sardines with my food. And then, so that I think is adequate for most people. However, if you have a history of heart disease or a family history of heart disease, in my case, my mother is dying of Alzheimer's, my grandmother died of Alzheimer's, we have in our family something called the ApoE4 gene, which is a gene that heavily correlates with Alzheimer's. The defense against early Alzheimer's is a very high level of DHA. So the only supplement that I take is a 500 milligram DHA fish oil every day. And I just make sure that it's fresh, that it doesn't turn rancid. The whole concept of rancidity that's been disproven by most manufacturers. There was a paper out of Sweden that studied 17 people and they found some rancid. That's from 15 years ago. It's not been duplicated. Most fish oil is absolutely fine. It's been lying on your shelf for 3 months. Throw it out and get another one. But we get the fresh stuff and we use it within a few days. If you want to do cod liver oil, that's fine too. But I believe that the benefit of the DHA in my personal situation is far greater than any concerns you have with it.
Because you have that ApoE4 gene.
I've got the ApoE4 gene. I've got one copy of it, and I don't want to want my brain to turn to Swiss cheese.
Do you think these genes can change or will change? You don't think so?
They are what they are. Now, over time, the newer genes are the 3s and the 2s, ApoE3 and ApoE2, which are the healthier genes. The ApoE4 is one of the oldest ones. But I can't change my genetics. And there's a 50% likelihood my son has the same.
And what would be an easy way for our listeners and your host here to determine if they are currently insulin resistant? Can we do something at home to test that?
Yeah. Let me just correct it. My son has a 1/4 chance of having it. Sorry, I said a half, 50%. I was 1/4%. But the only way to know is to get your blood work done. And most doctors will not check insulin levels or C-peptide levels because they don't understand it. So if they don't understand it, they don't see a need for it. And, most of the patients that access me online who are carnivores, who are already doing this, want the blood work, not only the blood work, but also the interpretation, because it's not that simple. I've got quite a few videos on my YouTube site, which is Carb Addiction Hub, that breaks down the blood work, but that's what we do in my office continuously. And I'll tell you, Patrick, the interesting thing, and I apologize this to people who try to contact me, if you call my office now and you want an appointment with me, and I work hard, I work 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, just seeing people, you're going to be getting a new appointment in late March, early April of next year. That's how busy we are. That's how much. Well, there's two parts to this. That's how much interest there is from the public in this, but also, more importantly, that's how few doctors out there are doing
what you're doing.
Yeah.
And what are the things that you're really looking at with an insulin? Like if I did my own blood test, what are some of the markers I want to make sure that they take?
Well, what you want to look at is insulin, C-peptide, hemoglobin A1C, a lipid profile. Not to see what your cholesterol is going to be high because it's supposed to be high. Yeah. But you want to look at your triglycerides and your HDL. You want to look at your BUN, your creatinine, your protein turnover. So the way I look at it, Patrick, and this is important to understand, most doctors look at one number to throw a pill at.
Yeah.
I look at blood work to tell a story. One number does not tell a story. It's a team sport. So I look at the different numbers to tell the story, and that's kind of what distinguishes people like myself. Now, if you go to a website called SMHP, the Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners, smhp.org,
okay,
you will find a list of doctors throughout the country, throughout the world, that practice this way. And you can access them in their practice. My information is on there, but there are many physicians all over the country. Some are cardiologists, some are dietitians, some are functional medicine doctors, some are surgeons like myself, but we all practice the same way. And that's where we can access people that will do that testing.
And is there enough information on your YouTube channels, and we would look for Robert Cywes, to somebody could do this themselves in their blood test, figure it out?
I would strongly recommend against that. And the reason for that is you can get the blood work done, but the interpretation is the issue. And it's an algorithm of figuring out where you are. I'll give you an example. A lot of people, carnivores, do not focus on insulin suppression. They blew it off. And only once we started looking at some of the other numbers and interpreting them comparatively, we were able to say, hey, this might be a little bit of a problem. Let's shift back a little bit. So, to my mind, and it's not because I do this for a living, believe me, I've got plenty of patients, self-interpretation may lead to incorrect conclusions.
Right. But would we not feel, if everything's going great, wouldn't we feel if there was something amiss without even doing blood tests?
No, and the reason for that is because feeling ill is insidious. What obese people do is they make their world smaller and smaller and smaller by doing less, but they're pretty comfortable in that small world. Diabetics don't feel awful because they didn't suddenly become diabetic. Yeah. So it is what they are is natural for them. It's only once you've improved and then you have that meal that go, wow, now I realize how bad it was. But we don't realize how sick we actually are. The last person to know they're an alcoholic is the alcoholic.
Yeah, true. Exactly.
And they accommodate for the headaches and the horrible feeling because that's the world they live in. So unfortunately, no. Sometimes you feel awful and you want answers, but it takes for a long time to get those answers. So not always.
Dr. Robert Kiltz, who was on last week, we liked him. He talked about some kind of a coating on the colon. Do you know what he was talking about there? He had a word for it.
Glycocalyx, or the glycocalyx, or it really
glycobiome, glycobiome or something.
Glycobiome. Okay, so it's a layer of mucus that the intestine secretes to protect itself from bacteria and other things. Wow. And it also is mucus that creates a gliding, so that poop comes out easily. Yeah.
Really?
Otherwise, it's like sandpaper. So the entire saliva, if you look at your saliva, when you're not eating or drinking something, it's very thick, and that mucus is the same thing.
And so that's what we get with a more meat-based, animal-based diet.
Correct. It changes. That changes. It's there for everybody, but it changes its nature.
Do you know what's so fascinating? Here we talked to you for 2 hours, and I really appreciate your time. But everything that you're saying, and the other carnivore docs we've talked to, is like 180 degrees from probably 95% of humanity today.
Correct.
Doesn't that blow your mind? Wow.
Well, if you go back a few thousand years ago, where we were still hunter-gatherers, I would say that 95% of people were aligned with us, and less than 5% were aligned the other way.
So it's just,
it is what it is. But I'm not going to tell anybody they must or should or have
of course
to. I provide information, and the one thing that I encourage people to do is do the experiment. And like you've done the experiment for a few months and you're feeling great. If you didn't feel great, you'd abandon the experiment.
Right. All right.
But try it and see, the amazing thing for me is what most doctors do is they're, okay, I've lost 100 pounds. I'm feeling better. I'm on no medications anymore. My blood pressure's better. My diabetes is gone. My cholesterol's high. So you're telling me it's a bad diet.
Yeah. How has it affected your sleep? Because there's sometimes I'll go 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the night and I'm just wide awake. I don't feel tired. I'm just not thinking because I meditate. It's just like in the middle of the day. What's up with that?
I think that's an important concept. So 2 changes. First of all, your quality of sleep improves significantly, but the quantity of required sleep decreases.
Does it?
So you may only need 5 or 6 hours of sleep, where before you were tired after 8. So the quality improves, especially if you lose a bit of weight, if you've got a weight problem. But the quality of sleep improves, therefore the amount decreases a little bit. But that's a slightly different for different people.
Yeah. So, I'm only 130 pounds. So before we go, how did you lose 100? You lost 100 pounds. What were you eating before and after? Do you you went to carnivore?
No, this is over 23 years. So I was just over 300 pounds. I call myself 297 because fat people never get on the scale when they're really fat. But I know I was over 300. And I progressively removed carbohydrates from my diet. So this is 23 years ago, just after Atkins. So I was low carb, high protein for a long time. Lost a lot of weight with that, but felt like crap. Started adding in more fat about 20 years ago, about 15 years ago. And slowly, I'm carnivore not because necessarily it's so much healthier or better. I'm carnivore because it's simpler, easier, and I prefer to eat that way.
Yeah.
So the more important thing is to be on a ketogenic diet, eliminate the carbohydrates, and the more you migrate to carnivore, it has benefits, but they aren't just health benefits; they're also practical benefits. I got kind of annoyed at having to throw out old dead vegetables at the end of the week. And my dog won't eat a leftover salad, but he will eat a leftover hamburger. And I'm comfortable eating leftovers. So it had a pragmatic component to it. Plus, I love to eat this way.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I mean, I just have meat sitting in the fridge and cut off what I think I'm going to eat and, sear it, and I'm good,
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Do you think it's important to eat both parts of the eggs, the yellow and the whites?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you're not just going to eat the chicken. If you think about a chicken, what you're eating is the whole animal.
Yeah.
It's the best whole animal to eat. So yeah, eat both.
So Dr. Cywes, what are you going to do this weekend? We're talking to you on Saturday morning. What kind of things do you do with your family on the weekend, during the weekend?
Well, today I'm going out on boating we've got some friends in town, so we're going boating today. The weekends are my downtime to spend with my son, to spend with my family, to have fun. And while I work very hard, having fun is also very important from a mental health perspective.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. We're on a Saturday morning now, even though it's Monday when you are hearing this. So before we go, kind of give folks a layout of your website and your social so they can find you and your wife's work before we...
Yeah, I think the best place to access our content is on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. It's called Carbohydrate Doc. Mm-hmm. And if you subscribe, it's free, but it helps us because I produce all the content for free. Okay. As a physician, I've chosen not to market anything. So if you see ads popping up, Google's getting paid, not Robert Cywes.
I understand.
We also have a TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram channel. My name is Carbohydrate Doc on all three venues. My wife is Carbohydrate Mom. So, and she posts pictures of what we eat, what we're doing. I tend to put more information out there because it's not about me. It's more about me with my doctor's hat on and my guide hat on. She's more about what we do in the family.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of clients where you work with newborns, like what you've done? I bet you do.
Spectrum. The ideal time to access a patient or for a person to access me is if you're thinking about having a baby and spending a few months before you even try to get pregnant, conditioning your body, both male and female, but mostly the female, the mother, as healthy as you can be before you get pregnant. Yeah. And then we manage it through the pregnancy. We manage the mother and the baby, and then obviously we manage adults as well. It is ideal to be proactive rather than be 50 years old and awfully sick on 10 medications with an arrhythmia and now say, I want to get better. Right. Yes, we can help you to do that. We help a lot of people to do that, but being more proactive is much better.
So with what's your diet? I keep having more questions. Sorry. Do you take any supplementation whatsoever in pills?
Sure. Free omega fatty acids, that's all.
That's it. Nothing else.
And then I make sure that I supplement with food.
Yeah. Well, sir, thank you. You're very kind to spend all this time with us. I really had a good time talking to you, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You too, Patrick. And hopefully this resonates with everybody.
Oh, I think so. Take care of yourself. The best.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. Thanks for being on the show. Patrick Timpone, OneRadioNetwork.com. As I said, we recorded this puppy a couple days ago. I will see you tomorrow. We're going to talk with Santos Bonacci, who's really a fascinating fellow, talking about where we are, who we are, why we are, and a lot of spiritual concepts. I love you all very much. Thanks for being here. This is OneRadioNetwork.com. See you in the morning, 10 o'clock.
Broadcasting from the beautiful Hill Country in Texas, this is OneRadioNetwork.com.